It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast, as we cover the very latest in property news every morning. And you'll find us these days on iHeartRadio, Spotify, also Apple Podcasts and Amazon. Of course, we report on the real estate market throughout Australia every day, and it is available from 6 a.m. every morning direct to your devices, where it's a Tuesday morning today, the 13th day for February. And joining us for the very first time in 2024 is Nicola Powell, the Senior Research Analyst from Domain, who was covering a lot of the real estate changing stories for us last year. And welcome back, Nicola, to the Real Estate Breakfast. I hope you managed to get a bit of a break over the Christmas New Year.
A very good morning. Look, I absolutely did get a well-earned break, but I think we've always got one eye on the property market. And I think, I love these podcasts because we know that Australians are just obsessed with the property market.
That's a good point that you make. I reckon if you take a lot of the world globally, the passion just seems to be a little bit more of a notch up when it comes to Australians' interest in property.
I absolutely agree with you. I'm from the UK originally, and, you just don't see the amount of coverage around the property market in the UK compared to what you see in Australia. We are a nation that is obsessed. We love an auction. We, follow the auction results each Saturday like it is a sport. And I think it really showcases that actually the dream of home ownership burns very strong for Australians. And, that is the ultimate dream, is buying your own home, and still remains that dream for many.
Yeah, but not all. Remember, we've reported on these millennials who are just saying, no, I want to live my life. I don't want to get bogged down with a 30-year mortgage. So there are some of these millennials that are saying, let's live life to the full.
Yeah, look, I think there are. And look, I know some individuals that, they just, their decision is not to own property. They rent and they invest in they have investments elsewhere. And look, that is a personal choice. I suspect that it is a growing trend because obviously we know that housing has become very unaffordable as time has gone on. But, I do think that there are many Australians out there that just dream of owning their own home, but it's just financially such a hurdle for them to actually gain access to the market.
And first off this morning, Nicola, the RBA, they left the rate alone last week and kept things in pause mode. Now, things are still not clear-cut in the inflation landscape that Michelle Bullock had absolute confidence cutting the rate this year, or will have that confidence. Still, she says too volatile. There's too much volatility around the world to be definitive, which was interesting in that press conference.
Yeah, look, it is interesting. I think, the fact that rates are on hold, this was, the large expectation from many, and she's made that statement that, they're not ruling anything out and they're not ruling anything in. And I really like that line. It's basically saying that nothing is off the table as yet. I wonder, though, whether that is in part covering themselves for potential changes. There is still volatility. Inflation is still higher and well outside of the bandwidth that is liked. So I do wonder whether it's just remaining in control of and preparing homeowners, preparing consumers that there still could be changes upwards and they haven't completely ruled it out. My view on this is I cannot see that we will have any more rate hikes. I do think that the cash rate is at a peak. I think the conversation and the outlook for the cash rate really shifted late last year. I think the conversation has morphed now to around when is going to be a rate cut. I do believe that that's going to be the next movement from the RBA. And you've even got the market pricing in 2 rate cuts this year. So I think, that is good news, but I think we've got to remember that we've seen multiple rate hikes. So I think it will provide a relief, but we're going to have to see a number of rate cuts to really help make a difference for homeowners.
Yeah, and when they say they're not ruling anything in or anything out, it's kind of the old saying, a bob each way. That way we're not going to be too affected when something does go awry. And she's also saying that she disagrees with the International Monetary Fund's suggestion to raise Australia's interest rate further. She believes that current rates are appropriate, and she reaffirms that the Albanese government's alterations to stage 3 tax cuts won't significantly affect inflation. So there's a bit of signalling there, isn't there?
Absolutely. I find it really interesting because I do think that particularly when you look towards stage 3 tax cuts, there are many economists out there that are concerned about the inflationary impact that could have. Look, I'm yet to be convinced. I think obviously, we've seen such a change in the cost of living. It is a cost of living crisis. And I think what comes with that is actually behavioural change and emotional change from Australians in terms of, they want to build up a nest egg if they're able to for a rainy day. And I think just because we will see more Australians take home more pay doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go out and rush to spend it. So, I do think that we are all living through such a significant change in the cost of living that I think we're all being very mindful of what we spend on what.
All right, well, that is Nicola Powell. She is the Senior Research Analyst from Domain. We'll come back and we'll talk more real estate on your Tuesday next.
If you're confused about the property market, don't be. Unlock and educate yourself with the latest trending analysis and interviews.
Well, we know that politics are intertwined like weeds growing in our backyards when it comes to the housing market across Australia. And one gets the impression that there is going to be plenty of politics, no doubt at play during the 2024 year. It has started with the Greens, who are demanding concessions on property investor tax benefits in exchange for their backing of the government's Help to Buy housing initiative. And that, incidentally, is set for debate in Parliament this week. The scheme proposes allowing first home buyers to pay only a 2% deposit, with the government covering up to 40% of the home's cost. However, Greens argue the scheme's limitations will aid only 0.2% of eligible buyers annually and inflate house prices. Housing spokesperson Max Chandler-Mather insists on curtailing negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts, channeling revenue into public housing, but without reforms, the Greens will not support legislation which is going to, they say, exacerbate the housing crisis. You see what I mean? Politics are going to be around this year in the real estate market.
Explore new property destinations where you could live with exclusive interviews covering real estate news and market insights.
And it's a Tuesday, plenty of real estate around Australia this morning. We are talking with Nicola Powell. And despite Sydney's reputation for sky-high property prices, resale returns over the past decade have been higher in other Australian cities. And Sydney's median house and unit prices surpass those other cities, but resale returns have been more impressive in smaller markets. So, Nicola, where is that standing out around the country for you? What is really leaping out?
So I feel like we need a drum roll, don't we, in launch of what is the city that has seen the greatest returns. So we actually looked at, we know property markets go through price cycles, and we know that Sydney is renowned for these roller coaster property cycles. And what we mean by that is Sydney tends to see greater rates of price growth, but we also see stronger rates of pullback in price in Sydney. But what we've seen is some of our other quiet achievers have seen some phenomenal rates of growth over the last decade. And we looked at the average marginal returns on property, and the cities that came out as the top performers for houses were actually Perth, Hobart and Canberra. Now, they saw returns of anywhere between kind of 5 to almost nudging up to 7%. So that's an average annual return over the last 10 years. And Sydney, didn't see, Melbourne saw the smallest over the last 10 years, then followed by Brisbane. But yeah, those cities, I mean, we know Perth and Adelaide have seen, and Adelaide was also up there at almost 5%, but we know Perth has really seen strong rates of price growth and really avoided any downturn that other capital cities really fell over last year.
Yes, and if you look at the 2024 year, Perth is probably in that solid position to just pick up from where it left off. What is happening, though, in Hobart, do you think? How is Hobart going to perform?
Yeah, Hobart has been really that interesting case because what we had seen prior to, say, the last 18 months is just prices just continued to rise. We saw strong rates of growth really being driven by people opting for that lifestyle location, people moving from the mainland over into Tasmania, getting greater value for money. That kind of retirement haven narrative really, is picked around Tasmania. I think we have seen prices pull back, but that return, when you look over that last decade, which really does capture a long period of time where we continue to see prices rise, the average marginal return over that 10-year period has been 5.8% each year. We have seen prices pull back recently, but I think, we did see such a phenomenal rate of price growth. I mean, Hobart and Canberra saw the greatest rates of house price growth during that pandemic upswing, which, none of us can forget that because it was such a phenomenal upswing and was the steepest for many of our capital cities.
And let's just have a look at the units in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Canberra, because at the moment I think it's fair to say they're offering larger returns compared to houses, which seems to be driven by affordability and accessibility to a wider range of buyers. No doubt the first home buyers getting stuck in.
Absolutely there. You're totally right. And I think what's interesting is those cities are, when you look at Sydney and Canberra, they are more expensive capital cities. And so I think that affordability aspect is something that's a real driver. And what that does steer demand towards more affordable property types. And even when you look over the last decade, we've seen a higher level of unit supply over that period of time in Canberra. And what that has done is really changed the landscape of offering for units. So it's really, it's been a game changer on what's on offer in terms of the types of property, the quality of the properties that are on offer in the ACT.
And of course, if you have woken up in Adelaide this morning, you're probably in a market that is just going to also, a little bit like Perth, just continue on its merry way this year.
Look, Adelaide, we always call it the quiet achiever, and Adelaide has absolutely smashed that. It's seen strong and positive population shifts, which continue to support housing demand. It's also much more affordable than our bigger capital cities, and I do think that kind of ability to work from home, the lifestyle that Adelaide offers, I think has really just been that draw card, and it just continues to see prices rise. And, we're expecting that to continue over 2024 also.
All right, then, we'll leave it there. Nicola, great to catch up with you for the first podcast for 2024. We look forward to your company, your insights, your predictions across the year.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Don't let dinner prep time go to waste. Plug in your earbuds to listen to a world of powerful real estate news and information.
It might be, we've already emphasised that there could be risks on the upside, there could be risks on the downside. Now, if the risks on the downside present themselves, then we have the options of cutting interest rates. If the risks on the upside eventuate, then we might have to look at whether or not we need to increase again. But I think the point is that we need to make sure that we don't have to backtrack on inflation, that inflation doesn't get away.
Well, I think we've seen a huge amount of property come onto the market across all price ranges on the Lower North Shore. I think it's about 25% up on last year. So a lot of that property just hit the market in the last kind of 10 days. So it's a little bit early to call, supply and demand. A lot more supply, I think, that will put a bit of pressure on pricing is my gut feeling.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.